I thought I'd be able to do this in 3 segments, but it's gonna be 4. But the good news is that some of them are kind of shorter than they have been. So, let's go ahead and get started talking about something completely different. This modern world. Oh my gosh, technology, social changes. Oh my gosh, it's gonna be crazy, y'all. We're gonna switch gears, talking about some things that are a little bit maybe more fun in a sense, and talking about some changes in technology heading into the 20th century. So, in this lecture, we're going to examine the social and economic changes moving towards the turn of the 20th century, understand the rise of nationalism and new powers in the world stage, and consider how Western pressure affected East Asia. So, let's start with technology. While the Industrial Revolution may have started in Britain, by 1890, Germany and the United States had surpassed Great Britain as the world's leading industrial powers. Industrialization also introduced entirely new technologies that revolutionized everyday life and transformed the world economy. Potent combinations of business, engineering, and science led to the institutionalization of engineering schools and research laboratories, which resulted in the discovery of electricity and new steel and chemical industries. Steel, a special form of iron, was reserved for swords, knives, axes, and watch springs until a series of inventions made it the cheapest and most versatile metal ever known. As a result, world steel production rose from 500,000 tons in 1870 to 28 million tons in 1900, 10 million of that produced by the US of A, 8 by Germany, and 4.9 million by England. Steel became affordable and abundant enough to make rails, bridges, ships, and skyscrapers, the new symbols of the cities. And we've already talked a lot about railroads, but the second half of the 19th century saw a dramatic expansion of the world's rail networks. After a rapid spurt of building new lines, British railroad mileage leveled off in the 1870s. France and Germany built longer networks than Britain's, as did Canada and Russia. The United States had the largest railroad network by 1865 and increased its mileage 11 times by 1917. The British built the fifth largest rail network for their largest colony, India, to reinforce their presence and to develop trade. In the 1870s, Japan hired British engineers to build the first railroad line there from Tokyo to Yokohama and sent them home after training Japanese engineers. Railroads consumed vast quantities of timber, left miles of deforested land, and opened new land to agriculture, mining, and other exploitation of natural resources, but at the expense of the Native American autonomy in the United States. No innovation of the late 19th century changed people's lives as much as electricity. Nikola Tesla, an Austrian immigrant to the United States, developed alternating current, a safe, cheaper method of producing and distributing electricity. Thomas Edison, born in Ohio, with his lab in Menlo Park, New Jersey, used a far more dangerous direct current, which also was more expensive to produce. It's no wonder he invented the electric chair. Edison, of course, famously developed an incandescent light bulb, and his company, General Electric, wired the Capitol building for electricity. Other uses of electricity appeared as well. Electric streetcars replaced horse-drawn streetcars, electric motors replaced steam engines, and as the demand for electricity grew, engineers harnessed the power of America's rivers. The plant at Niagara Falls provided a tremendous amount of power, but at the expense of the beauty of the falls. Now, this isn't covered in the textbook, but photography also changed the way people saw and consumed the world. Photography brought the battlefields of the Crimean War and the Civil War to the folks back home. Photography took people to places they had never been, and probably could never go to, and educated them about the wonders of the world, such as Mammoth Cave, Kentucky, the pyramids of Egypt, and the Mesoamerican ruins. Portrait photography helped Sojourner Truth save money by selling her portraits, allowing her to fulfill her dream of buying a home. Photography helped Frances Benjamin Johnston define a new role for women at the turn of the century. Her photographs of World's Fairs, including Chicago and Buffalo in 1901, put her on the map. Speaking of World's Fairs were ways of showing off these new technologies. The 1851 London Grand Exposition began the tradition of World's Fairs, but in the 1880s and 1890s they really came into their own. The 1889 Exposition Universelle in Paris saw the debut of the Eiffel Tower, the tallest structure in the world at that time, beating out the Washington Monument, which had just been finished a couple years before. The absolute most important World's Fair for our purposes was the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago. Chicago was the American city in the late 19th century. It was the home of the first skyscraper and represented the wealth of the natural resources of the West. The railroads went through Chicago, almost all meat went through Chicago for processing. The 1893 Columbian Exposition saw the debut of new technologies and products. Juicy fruit gum, cream of wheat, the Ferris wheel, Tesla debuted his alternating current system, and electricity lit up the White City, the collection of neoclassical buildings constructed for the occasion. The White City, by the way, inspired L. Frank Baum's Emerald City in The Wizard of Oz, which was an allegorical story for the time period. However, the fair was deeply segregated. African Americans were only allowed to attend the fair on certain days, although the Haitian Pavilion was one place that there was a continuous black presence at the fair. That and the human zoo. Yeah, it is exactly what it sounds like. Human beings put on display. They were mostly indigenous people from various parts of the world, supposed to be passed off like an anthropological exhibit. The anthropologists may have seen it as an educational tool, but they were really displays to promote white supremacy. Well, like I said, this part of the lecture is a little bit shorter than others have been. In the next segment, we're going to pick up talking about some of the social changes wrought by the modern world. And not all of them are going to be great.